This is Hard Parking, brought to you by Right Honda and Right Toyota out of Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm your host, Jhae Pfenning. Barrett-Jackson was just here. Auction week is over. I am exhausted. But coming up on today's show, got an opportunity to hang out with my friend Chris Ashworth, DTRockstar1. He's been on the show before, but it's been a while. But he came into town, so he and I went to Barrett. I'm going to talk to him about that a little bit later on, get his thoughts about his first time ever to Barrett-Jackson. So this past weekend, I was listening to Shaping Success, episode 406, Majority versus episode 406, Majority Rules. And I found it to be a very excellent listen as he and Robert Watson kind of talked about life and different things going on. But Robert had brought up the difference between the majority and minority can be big and it can be very little. And it's crazy that a lot of people apparently don't really understand those differences. If you take 100 people, 51 people make it a majority. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So if you have 100 people voting on something and 51 people say yes and 49 say no, then the majority wins. I think mentally when we hear majority, we're thinking 85, 90% of people, almost everyone wants it this way versus that way. And it could come down to the smallest of margins. Now, Robert Watson knows a lot about government and a lot of other things that I don't really practice that much. And he says it takes a supermajority in order to really move policy. And I think a supermajority is something like 67%. Don't quote me on that. You can look it up. So that in things of serious matter, 51 versus 49, we see that as 50-50, but the reality is it's not 50-50. And the reason I'm talking about that is I try to avoid politics at home. My wife and I do not see eye to eye on almost anything politically, and we're not even political people. But ever since this election, I just try to avoid, because she's the sniper type. She likes to make sniping comments even when you're not trying to mess with it. And with Trump now being in office, and this isn't a political thing, just listen to me, guys. So with Trump now being in office, he sat down and started doing just about everything he said he was going to do. Started signing all these executive orders. Some of them I understand and I agree with, and some of them I kind of raise an eyebrow to. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why we're doing this versus that. But I'm not an emotional person. You guys know me. I'm not an emotional person. I'm very even-keeled, and I like to evaluate things. And if you get beyond that thin layer of social media and impulse reactions, knee-jerk reactions to things that you don't agree with or you do agree with, and you start kind of digging into the why, sometimes you'll be surprised and you will either agree with it or you're like, no, actually, that's messed up. I'm not into that. Recall, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, the isidewith.com. I talked about that a lot leading up to the election. I've talked about that in the past leading up to other elections. And I was politically affiliated more with one candidate than the other. I think I was 84% RFK Jr. actually, followed by Donald Trump and then by Kamala. But what that means is you don't have to agree with everything that somebody else agreed with, but you may agree with the majority, or some of the things are more important to you than others. So two of the executive orders, they're the most controversial, my wife brought up with me. And one is the Equal Opportunity Employment Act, or Equal Employment Opportunity Act, and the other one is the Birthright Citizenship. Both highly controversial, one even more so than the other. All the other stuff, shockingly, we didn't talk about illegal immigrants or any of that stuff. So my wife proceeds to attack me with some of this stuff. And yeah, I voted for Donald Trump because at the end of the day, given all the variables, given all the sniff test, reading, collecting data from multiple sources, and then evaluating and coming up with my own opinion based on the stuff that I've processed, I made a decision. No one came to me and said, hey, Jhae, you will believe this. You will believe that. No one Jedi mind tricked me. That would be a hell of a trick. I don't just have a knee-jerk reaction. I don't follow or not follow someone for the way they talk or act or look. I evaluate, okay, what are your policies? Who are you surrounding yourself with? Do I trust that you're kind of trying to be real with me enough to where you can earn my vote? And some people got it and some people didn't. But the two most controversial things kind of stem beyond just pure politics. And this is where the majority versus minority come in, because the thought is, I don't know how, this is from my wife, I don't know how anybody could vote for this person over here because they are just a bunch of mean, nasty words. It's like, okay, I understand that you would feel that way, but maybe why do you feel that way? Like, what do you have that really makes you feel that way? Or if you voted for this person, then you agree with everything that they're doing. No. I agreed with the majority of their opinions on certain things, which is why they earned my vote. Not everything. So let's kind of take a look at this, because the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, by the social media and the mainstream media outpour, is Donald Trump basically doesn't want any black people, any whatever race, nobody. They don't want to have an equal shot for employment. Therefore, if you want to hire 50 white dudes, you can do it without penalty. If you want to hire 50 African Americans, you can do it without penalty, without taking into effect race, gender, all that stuff, right? So I'm looking it up and I want to share that with you guys because that's number one. The second one, I'm going to try to clear it because to me, that's a little more controversial. So I went to Snopes. Here's what happened. Okay, last night she goes, well, I bet you agree with this. I bet you agree with that. What is your thought? And I go, I honestly, it's been a busy week. I haven't really thought about it. I've heard things. I'm like, that's interesting, but I can't really tell you what I think about something until I look further into it. So let's look it up. So we both grabbed our phones and she was, already on 9 out of 10 anger for some reason at me. Not because I made these statements, because I voted for somebody that she didn't. So she's going through probably social media. I don't know where she's getting her information from. And I'm searching on my phone. I go, oh, okay, well, according to Snopes, this is what it says. So you know what Snopes is? No, I don't know what Snopes is. I go, okay, well, Snopes is supposed to be a fact-finding website. There's a few of them out there, but Snopes is one of them. So this is what Snopes says. This is what, I don't know, some law firm that I found out. This is how they define it. And I don't know what she was looking at. So she had read something off to me, and we basically were reading the same things, but we interpreted them differently. So right now I'm on verifythis.com, and it's another fact-finding thing. And the question is, does Trump's order repeal existing anti-discrimination employment laws? And this is categorically false. No, Trump's order does not repeal existing anti-discriminatory laws. What we found, and I'm going to read this word for word according to this website. These are not my words. This is on this fact-finding website. President Donald Trump revoked Executive Order 11246, which establishes anti-discrimination rules for federal contractors in 1965. However, this action does not repeal the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, because both acts were passed by Congress and signed into law. That's important because the clickbait media and certain viewpoints on certain parts of the aisle will have you think that he basically threw out the Equal Employment Opportunity Act that was passed by Congress. It's false. Okay. And this is why I don't get worked up over things like this. I like to look them up. Now, had he somehow was able to reverse the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972 that was passed by Congress and signed into law, I would wonder how much power, what's going on? That's not cool. Why? But I'm always looking for the why. Why did this happen? Okay, now that I know why it happened, do I agree with it? And I may say I still don't agree with it, or I may say, I didn't agree with it at first, but I guess maybe it makes sense. Even if it doesn't sit right with me, who am I to change it? So on January 21st, this last week, Trump issued an executive order titled Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. Now, I'm all for merit-based opportunity. I can see how it can go, how it can kind of get off the rails. So if you have 9 people filling 9 positions and you have one more position and you feel as a company you could be fined or sued if you hire someone based on race, sex, religion, all the above, if you don't hire that person, you're going to be penalized. Instead of hiring who the best person is for the job, whether they fall into those categories or they don't. I think that's fair. I know a lot of people who also believe that's fair, and they come in all shapes and colors and sizes. Okay, it's not just a white man's world or a black guy's thing or any of this stuff. So of this order, it specifically targets what it calls illegal discrimination in federal government and terminates multiple diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that spans several decades. So it's this big attack on DEI, and regardless of what you think about it, I always think of DEI personally as kind of another way of having affirmative action. And one group says affirmative action is good, and I understand the nature of it. But the other hand says it should be merit-based, and people need to earn that. Now, policy is policy, so people can still make their decisions. And make no mistake, someone could be there from affirmative action and still have earned it, just as much as someone could not be there because of affirmative action and have not earned it. So that's what this equal opportunity, this false claim, that's what this executive order is dealing with. And it does not take away the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, because that's what some people will have you believe. One of them is right down the hall watching TV right now and will probably fall asleep in the next 30 to 45 minutes. So a little more on this executive order. Executive Order 11246, which is this controversial one, required affirmative action and prohibited employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin by organizations receiving federal contracts and subcontracts, according to the Department of Labor. It was one of many laws and executive orders that established workplace protections for American workers across several decades. So this was very specific to companies trying to get federal contracts and subcontracts. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was also signed into law by President Johnson, prohibited discrimination in public places, provided the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal, according to the National Archives and Records Administration. Title VII of the Act created the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission to implement the law. The Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972 amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by expanding protections against workplace discriminations based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The act also gave the EEOC greater power to enforce these laws against violators. Trump's executive order does not change existing law regarding discrimination in contracting, employment, or otherwise. Rather, it signals the administration's focus on targeting organizations that violate existing anti-discrimination laws in their employment practices. So it's interesting, right? So without continuing further into this, on the surface, it sounds like this guy is trying to get rid of equality and the right to work if you're not a white man. But what I just read to you speaks exactly opposite. So there must have been some shady shit in some of these old laws that is now getting thrown out like everything else is getting thrown out. Interpret that how you would like. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Let's go to the next one before we get into some car news. So the real controversial one is ending birthright citizenship. This is one that I really raise an eyebrow over myself personally. Now, when my wife's drilling me about this stuff, I'm not getting emotional because I process information. Again, that's interesting. I wonder why. I wonder if there's a legit reason, and I still don't know the reason why to that answer. But the podcast that I listen to that my wife says has brainwashed me, she goes, you know what? You say all these Real Housewives shows and all this other stuff that I watch is brainwashing me and telling me how to act. your podcast do that to you? And I had no response to that because get out of here. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Also called me some really mean names that kind of kept me up late at night staring at the ceiling, wondering how I got here. But what they had said on the podcast, Chamath had said that he kind of read the 14th Amendment, the part of it. He read part of the 14th Amendment and he said, Trump's executive order is ending this citizenship birthright, and this will probably go to the Supreme Court, which tells me that it's controversial enough to where people aren't going to necessarily agree with it, and it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court to understand why he did this. Because the counter argument is, well, if he does that, then, none of his family should even be here. I'm like, hold on. Let's just back up a little bit. Let's double click on this thing and kind of read what it is. And I tried to explain to my wife, I go, well, he said that all persons are born natural, but I think something like if your parents aren't here or if you're subject to legal recourse by the United States, and you can only be subject to that if you're actually a citizen. So there might be some gray areas there. I'm not quite sure. Well, and my wife says, well, that's not what they taught us in school. I go, yeah, but they teach us all sorts of stuff in school that we found out later isn't necessarily the truth. And they're not going to send you they're not going to teach you the minutia of the Constitution. They're just going to tell you the cliff notes of what's good and what isn't good, right? And so I go, well, I hear you. Now, granted, she's getting all mad and I'm talking like I normally talk, like this. I go, yeah, but what did they tell us about Christopher Columbus discovering America our entire lives? And now he's been vilified. We don't have Christopher Columbus Day anymore. It's Indigenous People Day. Now they're taking down his statues. She goes, yeah. I go, okay. So in light of new information, things could change. So we've been giving people birthright citizenship for decades upon decades. And so that's all we've known. But if there's something written in the Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, that nobody reads, and let's say that America's been loosely interpreting that, and at some point it's changed over time, maybe it's time to amend the Constitution. Now, I've always said, you guys, if you listen to this long enough, I said the best thing about this country sometimes is the worst thing about this country. And it's everybody's falling back on the Constitution, a piece of paper that was written back in the 1700s when the world was different. The United States was different. Maybe we should take a look at some of this stuff and update it a little bit to fit what we're doing now. And it's a very controversial take. You might be telling me right now as you listen to this, if you're still listening, that I'm an idiot and it's the Constitution and it can't change. I don't know, but that's just me thinking. So I looked up the 14th Amendment, Section 1, and read the part that Chamath said on the All In. And the first time I read it, it seemed quite obvious to me that it shouldn't change at all. The second time I read it, it kind of leaves a little gray area. So tell me what you think. This is what it says. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So that's a mouthful. But I think the gray area comes with all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Here comes the gray area. And subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What does that mean? And I think maybe that's the part that's going to go to the Supreme Court. Because if you're an undocumented person, I think I could say illegal immigrant now, right? Because for a while in the woke culture, you couldn't say illegal immigrant. You had to say undocumented person. Kind of the same. You don't have your documents. And subject to the jurisdiction thereof. We have the sanctuary cities. I think you guys know what those are. That's where undocumented people can come and live without penalty of being prosecuted for legal things. You can't kick them out of there. They get the food, they get the money, they're given access to whatever they want. Some people probably use it to try to better themselves, and some people probably abuse it, just like Americans do with anything else like welfare, right? There's people who need it, and there's people who abuse the shit out of it. I'd imagine the sanctuary cities kind of work the same. In fact, taking a couple steps back, I got into a heated argument with my family about 4 months ago. Remember the people in Springfield, Ohio, eating the dogs, eating the cats? So we started talking about sanctuary cities, and I told my family, there are reports of these migrants committing some serious crimes, and you can't prosecute them because they're protected by the sanctuary cities or some sort of a sanctuary act. And my wife and my kids are like, no, that's not true. I'm pretty sure if you commit a serious crime, they're going to take you to jail. I go, well, I'm telling you, sure as shit. You guys got to look up the video in Boston. I don't know why I said Boston like that. In Boston, this last week or over the weekend when ICE started executing these raids. That's a controversial thing because 20 years ago, if you would have asked me, Jay, would you rat out your neighbor if you knew that they were undocumented? If we had a whole house full of undocumented people, would you call immigration? And my response was yes. My dad worked for the Immigration and Naturalization Service. No, he didn't kick down doors. He did IT, but that was his thing. He had the immigration hat. I'll be happy to have his badge whenever my mother wills it down to me when she perishes. But I've changed my stance on that because the current Jhae would say, well, if they're keeping to themselves and not causing a big commotion and just doing whatever, no, I wouldn't call it on them. But just like any other neighbor, like you have to have some really messed up neighbors to want to call the police on them. And it doesn't have to be undocumented, right? You don't want to be the Karen that calls because your neighbor's car is too loud. I have a loud car. Or they're partying too hard. You want to have a conversation with them first. Like, hey, man, it's like the drone guy, right? I went down the street and talked to the drone guy. Didn't want to do it, but that was the thing I should have done. And I did it, and I haven't heard from him since then, and I haven't seen the drone over our house. Same deal with your unruly neighbors. You'd rather talk to them and try to work something out, but you're not going to call the cops on them unless some stuff gets really bad and you have no other choice. And it would be the same thing if I had an entire house full of undocumented people living 1 or 2 streets down, and it was just broken down cars and parties and shit shows and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, hey guys, you need to, calm down a little bit, or I'm going to have to call the police. Or actually, I'll tell the other neighbor that I know is going to call the police. That way I don't have to call the police. But anyway, so going back to this citizenship, right? I think that if you're born in the United States, because this is what we've known our whole life, you should be a U.S. citizen. But I also believe that if you're over here illegally and you have a kid, you and your kid have to go back to the country you came from and do it the right way. Now, where does that lie on my priorities list? Very low. And then that's the answer I would have given on isidewith.com. Do I think you should have citizenship in that case? Probably not. How important is it to me? Not at all. Not at all. But the way this is written and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, again, sanctuary cities, right? Because now, if you watch that video from Boston, and they're first is a Haitian guy. These aren't even Mexicans. Everyone assumes they're Mexicans just because they came from the southern border. This Haitian guy has like 40 something accounts of has a criminal record of like 40 something accounts, like bad ones. Another guy that they picked up that got released by the sanctuary city jail, by the way, just like I said, was picked up for raping a woman and putting a gun in her mouth. Didn't serve any time because he's protected by the sanctuary city. So these are the things, and I know this from research. It's not from being emotional about it, right? It's research. And so in this case, the jurisdiction thereof, if you're protected by the sanctuary city, then that means the United States legal process doesn't apply to you. And if it doesn't apply to you, then are you covered when it comes to birthright citizenship? So that's why I think it's a little gray, right? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I think if you're born here, you should be a citizen. I think that's the case with other countries. Maybe they can do whatever they want. But I think if you're born here and we as the country, the United States, can't hold you criminally responsible for things that you may do that are illegal, then maybe not. So tell me what you think of that 14th Amendment. And so my what I told her, and it really pissed her off, I go, we have been doing this forever. And she tried to push me into a response. Well, if this is what it means, are you okay with that? Are you okay with that? Are you okay with that? It's like, well, no, stop hitting me with all these whataboutisms. I'm okay with the way it's been. And if it's written a certain way to where it actually excludes some people, I kind of understand. Now, I think we maybe need to amend the 14th Amendment so that it gets rid of the gray area. But there's some things, right? Because this thing goes on to say, based on the first sentence of Section 1, which is what I just read to you guys, a court has held that a child born in the United States of Chinese parents who were ineligible to be naturalized themselves is nevertheless a citizen of the United States entitled to all rights and privileges of citizenship. So that is almost like a direct contradiction to the and subject to the jurisdiction thereof clause, right? Because in this case, if they are ineligible to be naturalized, I don't know why you have been ineligible. Maybe you just came over here illegally, but you're still eligible. You just have to go through some paperwork. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. But it also goes on to say the requirement that a person be subject to the jurisdiction thereof, however, excludes application to children born of diplomatic representatives of a foreign state, children born of alien enemies in hostile occupation, or children of members of Indian tribes subject to tribal laws. There you go. So there's 3 things that fall underneath the jurisdiction thereof. So it's kind of tricky the way they write this stuff. A lot of it seems to be up to interpretation, or you need to put this into ChatGPT and say, please normalize this in layman's terms so that I understand what the hell it's talking about. But anyway, those are 2 examples of these executive orders that are the most controversial right now as we go into the second week of Donald Trump's second presidency. Again, I'm on record. He's not my favorite person, but I don't hate him. And when they do these things, I kind of take a look at, what's the response? What are people saying? What are people that I trust the opinions of saying? So again, my all-in podcast that I listen to, those guys don't all agree with each other, and they're not all Trump people. But when someone says, I used to be a never Trumper and now I like him, that gives me pause to stop and think, okay, why have you changed your mind? What should I be listening to? What should I be paying attention to? What's fact from fiction? I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but I don't dislike the guy. I agree with him in his policy and his team enough to vote for him. And I was going to tell my wife this last night, but it was useless to say. But I'm going to tell you guys, if you're still listening, history tells us how good a president is. Almost nothing a leader does now, unless you're Gavin Newsom, almost nothing a leader does now tells you if they're any good or not. You can get emotional about it. You can have knee-jerk reactions about it. You can celebrate it without really understanding what you're celebrating or understand what you're celebrating. But when we look back in the future, was this person a good president or not? Sleepy Joe. We like to call Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. I refuse to say, let's go Brandon. I think that's rude and disrespectful. But I don't know if he's a good president. Right now, he looks like a shit show as he stepped off. But we'll find out in 4 years if we made a big mistake or not. So, and that's why I don't get bent out of shape over a lot of the stuff that's happening, because whether it was Trump or Kamala, we'd still be trying to deal with this. And for everybody who says, my wife's probably on this bandwagon too, lower the groceries. What does the Gulf of America, which is silly to me. But it's for a reason, I guess. Or Greenland, right? Silly, but I'm sure it's for a reason. What does that have to do with the cost of eggs? Why aren't my eggs cheaper? Well, because it's been 1 week. You can't lower the cost of anything in a week. That would be a freaking joke, right? So you have to let the process play out. You don't have to be happy about it. But I would say this. If you're going to get worked up about something, look into it a little bit deeper. Try to understand it. Try to set your bias aside, your hatred aside, or your love aside, and look at it objectively. Because if I was this super blind, hardcore Trumper, right wing, whatever, then I wouldn't even looked into any of this amendment, any of these clauses. I just would have been like, yep, MAGA. Yep, MAGA. Fuck yeah, MAGA. Get him out, MAGA. But I'm not. 14th Amendment thing, kind of sketchy. I need to know more of why we're doing this. And the Equal Opportunity or Equal Employment Opportunities Act, it's not what everyone says it is. I just read to you, according to a fact check website, what that actually really means. Let's get into some car news. A Waymo was assaulted in Los Angeles over the weekend. Apparently this poor vehicle, unfortunately, didn't have anybody in it, but it was stuck at a red light because of a streetcar takeover. You know those takeovers that we hate so much? If you're listening and you like takeovers and you want to explain why you like them so much and why you think it's not a big deal, I want you to come on the show. We can give you a fake name. If you want to come in the studio, if you're here in Arizona, we can do this fun thing where I can blur out your face and give you a different voice. I've actually never done the voice thing before, but that'd be kind of fun. But I want to know why you think it's cool, because for everybody else in the car community, it sucks. You suck for liking it. But anyway, this thing was stuck at a light. The door was ripped off, the hood, everything was bashed in. And it was just a poor Waymo. Like, why? Leave the car alone. So I decided to look up and find out how many other times have Waymos been involved in these kind of vandalistic, I don't know if that's a word, but it's a word in this episode, these vandalistic incidents. Last year, a 36-year-old woman in San Francisco, shocker, was arrested for vandalizing on 17 accounts of slashing tires of multiple Waymo vehicles. You know how she got caught? The cameras. So these people who smashed, unless they did the whole Antifa cover your face up thing, these people who smashed the one this last weekend in Los Angeles will probably eventually be caught. Speaking of Waymo, though, a friend of mine, a very trusted friend, I trust his opinion on a lot of things. He recently tried a Waymo. I saw his story on social media and he goes, hey, checking out Waymo for the first time. So I slid into his DMs and I asked, how was it? He said, dude, I'm never going to ride an Uber again if a Waymo is available. I was like, wow. So that good, huh? And he said, yes. Now, I don't know. He's probably invested in Waymo. He's one of those friends. But I immediately downloaded the Waymo app. I haven't signed up or anything, but it's one of those deals where you trust somebody so much, you trust their opinion so much that it's worth a try. So I think I'm going to try to get in a Waymo at some point. If you don't know what a Waymo is, they're autonomous vehicles, semi-autonomous vehicles that are driving around with bubbles on them. The ones here in Arizona, they use the Jaguar F-Pace platform, so they look like Jaguar SUVs. And apparently they're also in San Francisco and Los Angeles. So there must be, maybe they're just a Southwest thing. But they're kind of the new era of transportation. You could drive your car, you can call an Uber, or you can ride in something that's being driven and monitored by somebody who's not there. The car drives itself, but every single Waymo is actually being monitored by a real person. Good friend of mine's son, I don't know if he still works there, but he used to work there. I know you're listening. But when he told me what he did, I was like, wow, that's fascinating. But I still haven't ridden in a Waymo, but I will, because I think it's kind of cool. Also, a 1955 Chevy Bel Air falls off a lift at Barrett-Jackson earlier in the week. I couldn't validate the story. It looks like it popped up 6 days ago, and Barrett-Jackson just finished. But then I also saw on some thread of the same story in 2022. So I don't know if that actually really happened at Barrett this last week or not, but I did see pictures of it, and that's crazy. So that lift company is probably done after that incident. There was no real information about if the Chevy Bel Air was at the auction to be sold or if it was just on display. Good friend of mine had his cars on display, some of his cars on display at Barrett-Jackson this last week on a 3-level car lift side by side. So he had 6 cars up on display between 2 lifts or one big 6-level lift. So hopefully, fortunately, that didn't fall apart. And finally, my Infiniti is almost done, but not quite. I got the radiator put in, I got the thermostat put in, I got the fans and the control unit put in, I got the new radiator hoses put in. I went to jump start it. The battery was dead as fried chicken, so I went and bought, after watching Project Farm. I don't know if you've ever seen Project Farm. I think I may have talked about it before. Project Farm on YouTube. It is a rabbit hole, especially if you like comparing products, comparing tools, comparing miscellaneous things. It might be on Project Farm, like which cleaner is the best for Windows and which battery starter and blah, blah, blah. So I watched a Project Farm video on jump starters because my son let me borrow his and he didn't give me the proper recharge cord. And of course, the one he gave me was 0. It wouldn't even power on. It was so dead. So I ended up buying a charge cable for him off of Amazon. And after watching that Project Farm video, I bought myself a jump pack that could start a car from a completely dead battery. Because the battery in my Infiniti is relatively new. I got it within the last year, but it is dead as Dillinger. So I put the pack on it today and I jumped it, got the car running, had the coolant burp kit on there. I was just watching the air bubbles pop up. Noticed that I took a step back and there was wet crap all over the place on the ground. So I couldn't quite figure out where it was coming from. It could be the power steering pressure hose, the radiator. It's not the radiator fluid. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's the transmission fluid or the power steering fluid. In my vehicle, it's the same fluid. I don't know why it would have burst. At first, I thought it was oil because when my car broke down, I had it transported to the dealership and then I had them change the oil. Now, unless I somehow screwed up one of the lines when I was installing the radiator, which is very possible, then it may have just could it have dry rotted? The car's been sitting for like 4 months, 3 months, how long ago was October? It's been sitting since October. And this is the first time. So it's kind of demoralizing that I finally got everything going. I got the car started up. I got it jump started. It's out there trickle charging right now. But tomorrow, hopefully it's ready. It's got a good enough charge where the car can start on its own. And then I'm going to contact the dealership and say, hey, man, what's this? What is it? Because that would be a shame for me to put all this work into my car just to have to take it to the dealership and have them fix it and give me a $1,400 bill for some shit. Not cool. Then I'd sell the Infiniti. If that's the case, then I might as well just sell the Infiniti and my Honda Z. And that is the car news. This conversation is brought to you by Arcus Foundry. Is your business tech feeling whack? Too many tools, too much chaos, not enough time? Arcus Foundry is here to fix that. With SparkForge, you get a unified platform that connects everything you need, your website, social media, phone systems, and more. No need for an expensive IT department for dealing with a bunch of separate systems. It's the all-in-one solution that saves you time and helps your business run smoother. Head over to arcusfoundry.com and use the code HARDPART, one word, to get your first month free. Upgrade your tech and get back into business. Chris Ashworth, welcome back to the podcast. Ready to talk about some Barrett-Jackson?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great that you came into town. This is your, I think, second time on the podcast. And you know a lot about cars. And, you know, when you hit me up and said, hey, I'm coming to town, perfect, man. I have a bitter guest pass for you. And we're going to go to Barrett-Jackson if you have time. Fortunately for me, you did have time. And we went. So, I mean, first and foremost, what were your thoughts about attending arguably the most popular auction in the United States?
The biggest thing is I could not believe how big it was. It was huge. I think about some of the biggest shows that I have back at home, and this was probably 10 times that, if not more.
Right, in land space, it's infinite walking.
Yes, I definitely got my steps in that day. I got a lot of exercise. And yeah, like you said, there was 6 giant tents outside.
You know what? There's a 7th. So there was one down by the drag, by the drift ride-alongs, and I saw it down there, but I didn't really go down. But then after you had left, I left that way, and I looked down. And I go, oh, there's a 7th tent. So apologies for not taking you to the 7th tent.
That's okay. There's probably a lot of stuff that I did. There's a lot of stuff that I did see that was just spectacular.
You know, what's the most surprising thing you think you saw there? And what was maybe one of the most least surprising? And then overall with the vehicles that they offered, were you surprised to see such a wider range, or was it all muscle cars you thought you were going to see?
I was surprised to see such a wide range because I was not expecting to see hypercars and, when I would watch Barrett-Jackson on TV, I would see a couple of supercars, but I was not expecting to see a Pagani Huayra. I was not expecting to see a Koenigsegg and a Bugatti Chiron. Yeah, I was definitely not surprised to see the muscle cars, but I couldn't believe just how many kinds there were. Normally, when I see it on TV, I'm looking at some of the higher dollar muscle cars, but I couldn't believe how many were deals.
Yeah. And this was Wednesday when we went. Is that correct? Do you remember the day?
That's correct.
Yeah. So come Monday and Tuesday, a lot of the deals were hammering. And I think the first part of Wednesday, and usually the day stuff, with the exception of Friday and Saturday, is, people unfortunately are losing their butt on a lot of these cars. But yeah, I guess the thought is, if you go to Barrett, you're going to spend $140,000 on a 1967 Camaro, when you could actually spend 50 grand on it, depending on what it looks like and what day it runs through.
Yeah, that's insane. And then, just some of the stories that I heard too about that I think it was a Cadillac Eldorado that sold. It was 1982 or something somewhere around that time frame. That sold for $1,000.
Yeah, I didn't get an opportunity to look that up, but I am curious to see if that was the actual case.
Well, on the day that we were there, there was I believe it was a 1963 Buick Riviera that sold for $17,000. I would have thought that would have gone for more, because I didn't get a close look at it. From what I saw, it looked like it was in pretty decent shape, or pretty good shape, rather.
Wednesday, actually the day we were there, 1982 Cadillac Eldorado. I'm going to need help with this. BIARR Barritz. It's not a pretty car. $1,100.
$1,100. Wow.
4.1 liter V8, 3-speed automatic transmission, lot 313. $1,100.
Well, back then, cars were not built well. But the other thing, too, is they didn't have much power, just because of the fuel crisis had already gone. And so they weren't cool at that time.
What'd you think of the movie cars? The movie TV show cars?
Let's see. I'm actually looking at them right now. I loved the Dumb and Dumber sheepdog, or whatever they called it. I was delighted to see that one. I noticed the nose was missing from it.
Right. It looked funny with our nose. Not that it didn't look funny already, but
yeah,
it looked really funny with our nose.
Yeah, it was cool seeing the Mirthmobile, the AMC Pacer from Wayne's World. I mean, some of them were kind of cheesy looking, just because it was obvious that they weren't the real deal, like that kit car Ferrari 308 that was supposed to be Magnum PI.
Oh, yeah, I completely forgot about that when you pointed that out. That thing was not very good looking.
No, it turned out to be a Fiero kit car.
Well, the Ecto 1, the Ghostbusters car, that ran through on Thursday, and it hammered at $297,000.
That was the next one I was going to mention, because that's on my screen right now, and that one looked perfect.
Right.
I don't know if it was the real deal or not, but nope. if it's a replica, that looks absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's stated as a recreation, but everything from the exterior to interior. So I don't know what you would do with it, but the thing that it felt like it was spot on. I guess if you have the money and just want to put it in your collection, I guess it makes sense There was a lot of
Yeah.
mystery machines that weren't too exciting, and I don't know what that the Flintstones cart went for, the golf cart, but that was interesting too.
Yeah, I remember that one. And you remember the kit, the Knight Rider?
Oh, the convertible Knight Rider one, yeah.
That one was a totally different generation Firebird,
Yeah,
but still looked cool.
wonder what that went for. Oh, I got a story about one car. And actually,
Okay.
since I'm looking at Pontiac, the 1983 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am kit recreation convertible, which is funny, $41,800, and it looked pretty legit, like exterior, interior. I think it was from maybe the second season or third season,
Okay.
not the original season, because I know the front of the Trans Am or the Firebird had changed a little bit.
Oh, did it really? In the later seasons?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Remember toward the end, and this isn't it because it's convertible, but remember toward the end they had like that super speed mode or whatever, and the things came out from the side of the car, and it had all these different weird louvers that popped up on it, and just made it look a little more fast and futuristic.
I only saw the early seasons of Knight Rider, so I didn't see the later ones.
Oh, that's fair. What did you see that? Well, let me tell you a story about this one really quick. So there's a
Okay.
1989 Pontiac Trans Am Turbo Indy 500 pace car.
Okay.
And it's part of the GM Heritage Collection. And a friend of mine, Randy, who buys all these little cars, and Randy's like one of the really good friends of Jake Johnson, who owns the Tower of JDMs. In fact, Jake bought Randy's old warehouse, so everybody knows everybody here. But he buys all these little one-off cars, and so this thing, Lot 27, came up on Monday, and it was supposedly one of a ton of these Firebirds that didn't really mean anything. They were kind of built up to look like a pace car, but they weren't really. They were kind of throwaway media cars because they didn't have all the aftermarket stuff on them. And so when this thing popped up, he looked at it and he started like really, really, really looking at it because nobody at Barrett-Jackson knew exactly what this was. It's just a throwaway car. They figured it'd go for $15,000-$20,000. And so he bids on it and he wins it for $55,000 after all the fees and everything. So it's like, God, this guy spent way too much money for this little Trans Am Turbo Indy 500 pace car. But it was actually one of three that were built specifically for the Indianapolis 500.
Oh.
Yeah. Two of them are at other collections. This is the one, according to Randy, that actually was used as the official pace car. And it's not just some throwaway car. It is the car. And so once people asked him, why would you spend the money on this? Tell us what you know about it, Randy, because, he spends a lot of money at Barrett. He told them and showed them all the proof on the car and everything, and people are offering him $100,000, $150,000 on the spot. He didn't take it. He doesn't need the money, but that's one of those steals. Like, I wouldn't have paid $55,000 for it because I'm not into those cars. I probably wouldn't even pay $25,000 for it or $20,000 or $15,000 because I'm just not into those, 80s
Right, that's
Trans Ams. And
that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. What he is, there's people like him like that. People like him out there like that. So it's a very much a Randy car. It belongs in his collection, and maybe at some point he'll dump it. He actually has one of the very few 300 Stillen Zs. I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
So it's a 300ZX, but it's like a super special Stillen edition. I had uploaded that at Cars and Coffee, and people who knew what it was just went apeshit crazy about it. So what are the cars that you saw that you were excited about that you were completely unprepared for? I know we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but as we kind of wrap this up, what are some of the cars that you really saw and that you get a chance to look them up to see what they went for?
I haven't really looked up to see what cars went for yet. I haven't looked at the results yet.
I can look at them as you call them out.
But one thing I was not expecting was the Porsche 959 or 959, as I like to call it. I'm usually not a big fan of German cars, but that's one of my favorite German cars. I think part of it is probably because I played Test Drive 2 a lot when I was a kid.
Sure.
Also called the Duel.
Mm-hmm.
We both agreed on the Ferrari 512 TR, the second generation Testarossa.
Yep.
Definitely all of the Nissan Skylines, particularly the R33 and R34s.
Hey, so the 959 Comfort went for 1.4, And there's actually two in town. There was an event on Saturday, Bagels and Bullshit, bring a trailers event at the Auto Car Club. And I'll send you a picture of it because you would have had a blast going to that too. But that was green. So a green 959 was in town with black wheels.
Really?
Yeah. And of course, this is the classic silver. I when I think of that car, I only think of the silver one.
Yeah, that's probably the most common one. I actually have seen a green 959 before.
Oh, and then the 512 TR. Let's see what that thing went for. That hammered at $227,000. So the Ghostbusters Ecto 1 recreation went for more than this Ferrari 512 TR.
Really?
Yeah, 227 versus what was it? 270. I think I said the Ecto 1 went for.
Wow.
And then the Skyline, I think there was that white R33.
That one was an R34.
There's a lot of other things that went across the dock that we just don't see, right? So Monday, they had things like the little Honda Odyssey, looked like a little go-kart. They had a three-wheeler go across for $7,400. Someone paid more money for that three-wheeler than that freaking Cadillac.
Wow.
The Pontiac Aztec went for $6,300.
The Aztec. Wow.
This is actually surprising to me. There was a 1988 Ford Mustang GT convertible that went for $8,800. So that thing must need a lot of work, or there must be something wrong with it, because I know those Fox bodies are really coveted by a lot of people.
It depends on
the 93 Acura NSX, the white one, went for $77,000, which I don't know, man. There's a couple things with that car that give me slight pause. For $77,000, I think you can find a really clean example in the United States from a seller, like a normal person, and get a clean one that doesn't have a Vortex supercharger or whatever that's all about on it, that you couldn't see. You know, when I see something like that, I see blacked out taillights, and I see a kind of a Wings West front lower bumper arrow on it, and I know it's not supposed to be there, and I know the wheels aren't 93 wheels. It always gives me a little pause. Like, what are they hiding? What are the dark secrets of this car?
Was that the Honda NSX, the one with the
nope,
right-hand drive?
That was the Acura one, the white one. The red one was the right-hand drive NSX that was parked outside. Remember looking at that one, and that thing went for $30,000.
Oh, wow! That's less than half of the other one.
Right, for a couple reasons, right? Because it's a gray market vehicle being right-hand drive. I didn't even realize it at the time until I went back and looked at it and read the description more. Has a branded title from Japan. So I don't know how you would have a branded title from out of market, but the top of it's painted red and it should be black, especially for a 91. So that tells me it's been repainted at some point.
Okay.
And the reds don't match, so another sign. And then it has 2002, 2005 wheels on it. So, I mean, $30,000 before fees. If you have the money and you want to spend it, not that there's any real market value for a right-hand drive car, like really, right? Then
yeah,
I guess get it. But I've seen them go for 22, 23, 24 imported and maybe semi-rough shape, and it's an automatic, but you could get it squared away for right around 30 without a branded title. So I don't know.
The automatic will bring it down, right, in price?
Yeah, and I think without looking at the raw numbers, based on just my observation, I would say that 90% of the NSXs in Japan are automatic.
Oh, I didn't know that.
With the exception of, obviously, the Type Rs and the Type S Zeros. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why that is. But most of the right-hand drive NSXs that you see get imported are all automatic.
Well, speaking of the NSX, I think the coolest car that was in the parking lot was your car.
Ha.
And I'm not just saying that. I didn't see anything else that was that cool.
There were some nice cars out there, but I definitely appreciate that. There's some hidden, some nice C8s and stuff, and not comparing my car to a C8, but maybe there's a Porsche or something out there that was pretty cool, but I really do appreciate that. Do you think you're going to come back down to auction week again?
It all depends on when we decide to come as a family. So
sure. Well, what's your takeaway from coming to Barrett-Jackson and being able to hang out?
The main thing, I think, is it really changed my perception of it. Because I thought it was just all muscle cars. That's all I saw on TV. And just with the exception of a few exotics and tuners, but it's everything and tons of it.
Yeah. You really need more than a day to walk through it and really see. Maybe a day and a half, unless you get there in the morning and leave at 5, 6, or 7 at night to really experience it. I think you need more than a day to kind of take your time and see, because, if we walked one way and we walked back the other way, if we reverse field, we would notice stuff that we didn't even see the first time.
Right. That's what you were saying when we were there, and I agree.
What was your favorite car at Barrett? Not in the parking lot.
That's a tough call. There's so many of them there. I think that might go between the Porsche 959 or 959, as most people say, and the Pagani Huayra.
Yeah, that Pagani was pretty cool. I think went for 1.7.
That's it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 1.7. I didn't directly meet the guy that bought the car. He's a wholesaler out of Miami, but I was with a friend whose friend is associated with that guy because he kind of joined our little group and was walking around. And so I think he's bought that car and sold that car like more than once. So I think he was trying to micro flip it, and I think he may have lost his butt on it this time a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that some of those cars sell brand new for a few million.
Yep. I would take one. I don't know what I would do with it, but I would totally take one if I had that kind of money and didn't have to rely on it for anything other than to take it to a car event and have people drill all over it.
Right.
Because you can't take it anywhere after that, right? It's not like, hey, you guys want to get some lunch after this? Like, nope, I'm taking this thing home.
Work too well.
Yeah.
Just take it to a car event or take it to a track if that's what you're into.
Yep. Well, good deal, Chris. It was great talking to you. I'm glad you hit me up. I'm glad you came into town. It was good to be able to hang out with you. Maybe next time we'll get you back and we'll come in studio and do it proper.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the pass, man. I appreciate it.
I try to take care of my people when I can. I take care of the people who take care of me, and you've always taken care of me.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks a lot, man.
I want to thank Chris Ashworth, DTRockstar1, for joining the show. It's a great time. I had a great week. There's a lot of stuff I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit more with the auction. I went to see a panel, supercar panel, with some really good people. My friend Amy Shackelford was on there, Peter Brock, a guy named Jim Miller, a couple of designers, the lead technical designer from Hennessy Motorsports, and one of the guys, his name escapes me right now, but he worked on the Ford GT projects. But in the preservation of the length of this specific episode, I think I'm going to recap some of those things a little bit more next week and talk a little bit more about my Barrett-Jackson experience, some of the people that I saw, some of the things that I did. I wanted to give this episode to Chris Ashworth and my opening conversation about the president's executive orders, which I did not intend for them to go that long. So I apologize, but hopefully, those are the things that kind of help define who I am to you if you don't know me personally. So with that being said, I want to thank Right Honda, Right Toyota, Toyota of Huntington Beach, Claremont Toyota, and Gardenia Honda, ArcusFoundry.com, AutoCannon, officially licensed Honda and Acura gear. Go to honda.autocannon.com for Honda gear, acura.autocannon.com for Acura gear. Sign up to get on their mailing list and get all sorts of cool stuff, like the stuff you see me wearing on social media. Gotta thank Patreon business supporters, Automotive Specialty Tool out of Owings Mills, Maryland, Kuya Automotive out of Winter Garden, Florida, Pell Construction out of County, Michigan, Big House Small Home Design out of Ashburn, Virginia, and Traverse City, Michigan. And the aforementioned, way back at the beginning of the show, Shaping Success with Wes Tankersley out of Boise, Idaho. Special shout out to Mark Stolman, Catherine Cox, Eddie Ramos, Richard Graves, Byron Jones, Bo Jung, Oscar Mina, Drew Bunkley, and Yasu Chiba. If you're interested in picking up any swag, go to hardparkingpod.com. Email the show. You can email the show, hardparkingpodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram at Pfenning. The podcast now has an Instagram, so follow it at hardparkingpod, or you can follow me at Pfenning on my personal Join the Hard Parking Violations Facebook group. And if you enjoy the show, share it with a friend, and I will talk to you all next week.
Shut up!